No hay nadie. ¿Cuál es la guardia aérea que usaron ustedes?
La misma.
¿Cómo cuál es? ¿Me lo puede? Entonces, CCPSC, ¿no?
Sí. ¿Estás en otra sala tú?
Sí, estaba yo.
Ok. Hola, saludos.
Chile.
¿No?
Saludos.
Sí.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Sí,
Buenas tardes.
No me ven.
Ya me estaba entrando a preocupar.
¿Cómo lo tienes activado la cámara?
Pero no sé por qué le he dado todo lo odio para ver en panel de dirección,
Y no
en
será
panel
ahí
de
mismo.
control. Ya la vez pasada tampoco me oyeron ni yo pude hablar.
Ni te oyeron tampoco. ¿Y puedes escribir?
Sí, escribí, sí, pero sí. Me imagino, ¿no?
Ah, mami, ahora que no puedo y dijo que te oye.
Yo no sí, si no me oye.
Este audio tú tienes el micrófono.
¿Ya me escuchan a mí, Carlito?
Se supone que y no, yo tampoco me ven. La cámara no, tampoco me ven. LA, eso soy yo.
Tengo a Lili ahí. Pero... Quiero saludar primero a las personas antes de comenzar la transmisión, o ya estamos en... Sí, hola, saludos a todos.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone from Havana, Cuba. Thank you very much for being with us in this second session of the cycle Cuba at present times, or Cuba en la hora actual, which is called by different Cuban organizations at this point. Now we are broadcasting from Facebook and YouTube. And also, we have an important number of friends, people who usually cooperate with us, which are gathering with us in Gypsy. And I would like to thank you all for being with us. This meeting, Cuba en la hora actual, or Cuba at present times, is called by Casa de las Américas, the Union of Journalists, Accountants, the Red en Defensa de la Humanidad, Martin Luther King Center, Resumen Latinoamericano, and the union or the organization of lawyers from Cuba, as well as the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples. This is organized under the name Cuba at present times, Cuba en la hora actual, and it's trying to be a space for reflections and dialogues concerning the challenges faced by Cuban Revolution. Martí at present times in Cuba is the name of an essay written by Cintio Vitier in 1994, which was another important and difficult moment for Cuba. And in this space, by naming this space, we pay tribute to Cintio Vitier. During this cycle that had the first meeting on August 17th, we would like to speak about the strengthening of the blockade against Cuba and its impact, as well as the way that Cuba has been facing COVID-19 and the measures and actions taken in the national economy and social inclusion. We are accompanied, as I said, virtually by some friends, intellectuals, activists, and some members of some other social movements of the Américas, as well as some of the participants in the first cycle of this Cuba at present times. We have, during this second encounter, we wanted to speak about the challenges and fundamental needs that Cuba is facing during these times of blockade, the pandemics, and the difficult economic situation we are facing. We are accompanied by the Deputy Minister of Planning and Economics Ministry in Cuba. We are also accompanied by Gabriela Cultelli, who is a coordinator of the Defense Network for Humanity, the student of the University of Havana.
Sí, hola. Tengo que pedirles a
I would like, please, to request everyone to turn off the microphones, please. Well, we also have the participation of Joel Ernesto Marili Domenech, who is a student from the University of Havana. We also have the participation of Ernesto Moreira, professor of public law, international law in the University of Havana, and Ileana Morales, National Director of Science, Technological Innovation of the Ministry of Public Health, President of the National Association of Health Education. Me, myself, and Jorge, and Jaime Gomez Triana, Vice President of Casa de las Américas. I'll be moderating this encounter. Each of you shall have 15 minutes for your participation and through chat in YouTube and some comments in Facebook. For those who are using questions from those watching this encounter, and those using internal chat in Jitsi, you can be leaving some questions in the chat and some comments, and we'll be more than pleased of sharing with you. As I said, we are broadcasting in Spanish by YouTube in Resumen Latinoamericano, and in English by YouTube, the People's Forum organizations, to which we are very grateful. I give the floor to Dr. Ileana Morales, National Director of Science, Technological Research in the Ministry of Public Health. In some minutes, she will be participating in an important meeting, which is held every week, led by the president of the country, speaking about the way we face the epidemic, the pandemic, COVID-19. So I would like to apologize before the rest of the members of the panel. She is going to be leaving this saloon before time, so it's a privilege to have her with us in the midst of this important meeting, which is tackling important issues for the country. Thank you, doctora Ileana Morales.
Ahora está bien. Ya. Sí.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's certainly a challenge. We are at a time that is a challenge. It's complex, it's interesting. And I'm going to read my intervention so that I can make it faster. Dear colleagues, the world is witnessing a complex time and perhaps unprecedented. This traumatic experience should be used to review social and health policies that enable us to go to higher levels of solidarity and social integration. No doubt, the expansion of the pandemic of COVID-19 worldwide has proven, apart from the fragility of human health, the need to have a health system that can guarantee accessible services with quality and with security guarantees. COVID-19 is not an isolated event. It's a consequence of underlying global phenomena, many of them condemned for decades by our Commander-in-Chief, Fidel Castro Ruz. And we'd like to highlight the deterioration of the environment, the demographic boom, the aging pattern of the population, and the unsustainable consumption pattern worldwide. In this regard, the response by countries before COVID-19 has taken into account the potential acquired in terms of organization and functioning of health systems. Likewise, the pandemic has shown inequality in the world, including lack of access to dignified medical care, needed medication, and the need for professionals and technicians to face such challenge. Nowadays, the pandemic continues on the rise with a great number of diagnosed cases and death. Over the last few days, by August 23rd, there was a total of 212,763,176 confirmed cases of this disease. It might seem incredible when we began this battle. And we would like to say that we have already 4,447,119 dead. The evolution of the pandemic is not the same in all countries or continents. The numbers by millions of inhabitants prove the inequalities that characterize this world and other factors that have emerged as a spearhead in this crusade for health. Dear colleagues, allow me to share with you today some experiences on Cuba's response to tackle the COVID pandemic. We do that aware of the importance of present times. We have to consider the health effects, social, economic effect that this disease is leaving behind in the world, and in our country this is aggravated by the consequence of the cruel and reinforced blockade by the U.S. government that has imposed on our country for over 6 decades. This anti-epidemic response has had special effects in our country. When one part of the world was hearing the increase of atypical pneumonia cases, Cuba was speedily preparing its national plan to tackle this situation that was approved on the 3rd of January 2020. This was national on over 400 intersectorial actions. We did not lose a single minute, and today we keep up working after 17 months. We implemented the measures. We train all health personnel and other sectors, workers from other sectors. We planned all the activities in the health institutions, including the escalate of the intensive care units. After 40 days of the confirmation of the first case in the world, our country grouped together the first group of science on the 12th of February 2020. This organization was designed in such a way that its management enabled us to give a response that the country and the government meets in the face of the problem that at that time we saw it was going to be extremely complex. The uncertainty of the unknown imposed on science and is still imposing on science, and especially medical sciences, a major challenge. In that regard, the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party in Cuba and President of the Republic, Comrade Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, talking about the work developed by science and technology at the service of COVID, has expressed, and I quote, a group of experts from several areas have laid out the foundations of the strategy that the Cuban government built with major efforts to defeat COVID-19. There's no mystery behind this trained force that is working for the same objective, socialism. In this regard, we have to highlight that, I'd like to highlight specifically that the scientists of my generation, we were born during the Cuban Revolution, and it has had a great cultural and social impact in which impossible goals are part of our everyday life. COVID has not been an exception in this regard. The country with a developing economy has been showing so far modest results in the tackling of COVID-19. Not everything we want, but perhaps we have won some encouraging results, some other results in which we are still working, as a direct consequence of the huge investment in biotechnology in the last century, as well as in a public health care system with high accessibility levels. Cuba's response has been based on differentiated care to vulnerable groups, search for cases, isolation of cases, also on state-of-the-art medication produced by Cuban biotechnology, and this is, of course, guaranteeing sustainability for us. The comprehensive management model in Cuba has three major components: the epidemiological, the one of organization of health services, and on the one of science. This is based on a strong statistical system that is it issues daily data as well as training. This model is cyclical and comprehensive. This is coupled with the iron will of our government, the leadership of the Communist Party of Cuba, and the support of all mass organizations and our people are large, and it has proven to be viable so far. The country is facing a new outbreak of the disease, especially caused by the expansion in all territories of the Delta strain, and it has had a great contagious effect. On the 23rd of this month in our country, we had 583,299 cases and a total of 4,544 dead patients. We have to say that lethality is still low. We have 0.77 so far. This is below the one reported in the world and the Americas. And we work every day to continue reducing this indicator. People who are saved and recovered amount to 530,211 for 91%. The country, no doubt, has been able to face this challenge because we made huge investments in diagnosed kits, and we made these investments. It has been increased in the last few months, as well as the production of medications, and we have been trying to develop technology of our own. Dear guests, the vision of Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro, who was able to understand that the full development of public health, free education coupled with social assistance, and the true development of science was part and parcel of the road to achieve total sovereignty, as well as the exact approach given by the leadership of the country to face this pandemic. This has been key in all these aspects. Nevertheless, we still look for new solutions to new problems, new alternatives to new strains, and new organizational and health measures in the face of the new cases, and mostly serious and critical cases. Our socialist society, with total access and coverage of health services that are universal and free of charge, professional and technicians who are highly classified. We also have an infrastructure that have been created over 60 years, and also the social fabric to tackle these issues have enabled us to structure a comprehensive response in the face of such threats. An important part of this response has been found through scientific activity. The creation of this science group and this innovation committee, as the execution of these tasks, have been an important contribution to the fight against these diseases. Our country has proven once again that the impact of science and innovation is not a consequence of the market, but rather of an economic socialist system that is socialist, that generates results and is, of course, focused on people. The contribution of science to the tackling of COVID-19 in our country has reinforced social perception of science as a factor of development and human process, and also it's a cultural approach. Because of its strategic importance, I would like to highlight the role of science in three major issues: development of new protocols, development of new epidemiological strategies, development of new ways of dissemination of information. All this, together with the comprehensive approach when it comes to the creation of temporary working groups to tackle COVID. We have daily meetings headed by the President of the Republic, has made a difference in the management of this crisis. Also, many specialists and experts who are part of these national groups and scientific societies have contributed with knowledge to continue improving our Cuban protocol against COVID-19. We have to say that the main innovation of these science groups and medical assistance groups in the Innovation Committee of Commit and the work of our men and women have been to maximize their results based on fostering the scarce resources that we have, and of course we put this to the service of this pandemic. The network of health institutions and its research centers, the conception of health complexes, and our institutions have come together to fight against this disease. Over 200 institutions are working to face COVID-19. Another important element has been the triangular management model to manage this pandemic and its results. Likewise, the Center for the State Control of Medication, Medical Devices, our National Regulating Authority, and National Coordinating Center for Clinical Trials have played a key role when it comes to the adoption of mechanisms that facilitate the approval and the implementation of new studies. Today, we're executing in the country over 1,000 research works related to COVID-19, included health intervention, medical interventions, and clinical trials. We have, out of these, 254 are national research works and 34 are clinical trials. Among the results with the highest impact obtained so far, we would like to highlight, first and foremost, the development of well in advance, we have developed 5 vaccine candidates against COVID-19. And after long clinical trials conducted in record time, 3 of them already have the authorization of emergency use as a vaccine. Well, Cuba is actually the first country in Latin America to obtain such results, and we are part of the small group of countries that are working, have already obtained a preventive, effective vaccine against the virus SARS-CoV-2. In this 3 months of complex sanitary intervention, Cuba has vaccinated over 20% of its population, which will continue to work speedily to conclude vaccination of all Cuban population before the end of the year. Another specific feature again in the battle against this deadly enemy have been the solidarity with other world countries. We have sent 57 brigades to 40 countries with over 2,000 professional health technicians with high training. On the other hand, the clinical basic study in our country, when we have shared this with other experts worldwide, I would like to share with you countless world fora, and scientific events. And likewise, we have worked very hard to expand the visibility of the scientific results and the medical results of Cuba and we have been disseminating our main result. Dear comrades all, no doubt we have accumulated numerous evidence in Cuba and the world, and there's many lessons learned in Cuba. The main lessons learned have been we have conceived a higher management model when it comes to research and medical care. The first of them, actually the second, guided by the knowledge-based approach. We have included, and to me this is the most important thing we've learned, we have learned about this sense of urgency. We have been conducting active screening and other technologies applied to epidemiology. We have seen the growing role in the primary level of care, and Cuba has been a pioneer in this regard for the last 30 years, not only to focus on prevention, but also on the therapeutical part. We have also learned about the value to have national protocols that are the result of the consensus among our specialists. Believe me when I say that it would be impossible to express in detail how we have articulated every piece of work and the love and devotion that we have put on it as disciples of our national hero, José Martí. We say that the duty of a man is there where he's most useful. And we have to say that when we depend on a man, on selfishness to cultivate virtue, but we have to prevail. We have to consider virtue, and it should prevail. I would like to conclude by saying that Cuba has all guarantees to face the pandemic with social and health indicators that are equal to first world country. We have highly specialized human resources, a health and science system that is robust, a prestigious pharmaceutical and biotechnological industry, and this is the result of the work of a country with higher endeavors for the well-being and the health of our people. All that, in spite of the blockade we're submitted to, a blockade that without no justification affects our rights with deadly impact on health and collective health. Nevertheless, Cuban people, we shall continue to build an increasingly fair society, inclusive, including fostering participation in a better world. As Fidel taught us, it will always be possible.
Thank you very much to Dr. Ileana Morales for sharing with us in a very tight way all the actions performed by Cuban doctors, by Cuban medical care, by the government in facing COVID-19. And one of the things which are happening today in Cuba is the non-real denunciation of the situation or bad actions performed by the government. You were referring to the blockade that is imposed by the United States, which is a genocidal action, has been so shown during these pandemic times, but also some important and relevant staff from medical care in Cuba shall be witnessing this false accusation. We shall be listening to Dr. Guillermo Juan Guerra Bustillo, who is the head of Nephrology National Institute. Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Guillermo Juan Guerra.
And myself, Dr. Guillermo Juan Guerra Bustillo, specialist in nephrology, a professor in this specialty, and director of the Nephrology National Institute. First of all, I would like to convey a message for the professionals of health care alongside the world. We are facing this pandemic that goes together with the kidneys chronic disease that is present in terminal status of the patients when they need some kidney transplant. This has some impact both in pediatric patients, which is so hard to see these kind of patients suffering from this disease, and we also see this disease in adults, mainly in senior citizens. We specialists working in this specialty, which is a pandemic that goes together with COVID-19 pandemic, We all know how difficult it is to deal with patients suffering from this disease. This kidney chronic disease is present in about 50 million inhabitants, male in adults. But there is also a small amount of patient, a short amount of patient is 0.2, 0.5% of the population that might need 2% of high technology health budget. For a country like Cuba, and we, by the way, we're presently working in some issues related to state and some projects in nephrology for Cuba, a country which is under a genocidal plan imposed to this country, and there are no specific words to describe this blockade which is imposed to Cuba. However, the Cuban government in its policies and projects have kept a program which, despite this blockade has been taking place, has been developed. We are also to acknowledge the effort deployed by our industry, by BioCuba Pharma, which is a company working all the time to be able to give necessary support to this patient in a 70% of this help. This help should be taken from faraway places, 70% of it, all the technology from Germany, for instance. Tablets are taken from Germany, and patients cannot put away this treatment. When a patient is in a hemodialysis, you have to go on every other day to receive this kind of treatment. Same thing happens with kids. Same thing happens with disposable material, which is brought from faraway countries, from Germany, for instance. We are making, I would say, not great effort, because indeed we are working hard all the time, but we are, instead of using this trade, these possibilities of exchange which are close to us, and we have been using that exchange in some other occasions, but we have to go to faraway places by plane, because we are in need of some materials and technologies which are needed here for our patients. And same thing happens with drugs like immunosuppressants, which are brought from some other countries to give treatment to transplanted patients. We have to invest about $5 million of immunosuppressants so that patients do not reject the transplanted organ. So we have been doing this, and we have speaking about this in international events. We have been approaching the medical international community. This is a genocidal action. This is just led to great difficulties in the Cuban population not to access to different possibilities and services and treatments which are not in the hands of the government to be given to the population. This is also a message for our medical care professionals not to be provoked or incited by this kind of actions. I believe myself that the essence of the revolution is what have been achieved in medical care. It doesn't mean we don't have diseases. We of course have diseases, but we are talking about biological, psychological, and social benefits, including literacy campaigns, cultural development. That, of course, all that has an impact in the health conditions of our patients and our population. As Fidel taught us, and his legacy shall not be betrayed.
Sí, bueno, continuamos.
Okay, thank you very much. We shall continue in this second encounter of the cycle Cuba at present times, Cuba en ahora actual, and after listening about the impact of the blockade stated by Dr. Guillermo Guerra Bustillo. And we shall be listening now to Mildred Granadillo de la Torre, who is Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Economics and Planning, and she will be talking about the impact of the blockade as well as the economic transformations in Cuba, which are also under the impact of the blockade and the measures that have been implemented against Cuba, which are much more aggressive. Thank you very much, Deputy Minister, for being with us. We would like to thank this opportunity given to the Ministry of Economics and Planning to share with you this afternoon. We would like to make a presentation, kind of exchange about the results, the impact that for more than 60 years have had the financial, economic blockade, also technological blockade imposed by the United States. We shall speak about the main transformations related to development in our country. We shall never give up our economic and social development. We shall have a presentation, and this economic financial blockade imposed against Cuba have been rejected by the international community. This has been strengthened in the last years. This is the most approaching or the widest economic war, unequal and long-lasting, that have been faced by more than 60 years by our people. Only under the socialist system based in social justice and working together, the party, the government, to defend the country, in this underdeveloped nation, small country like ours, with a shortage of natural resources, all these actions are to avoid the collapse of the development, and this has been strengthened in the last 5 years. Since the year 2017, the U.S. administration has imposed more than 243 coercive measures out of those 55 in the year 2020 that has some impact in the national economy. Among those negative impact, we can speak about the fact that 231 entrepreneurial or companies, Cuban companies, has additional restrictions, mainly in the offers to goods and services to the Cuban population, limiting these kind of services to our population. There is also a hunting to the different possibilities of payment through different services we are exporting and importing, as well as the collection of money for the services and goods we export. Those are professional services. We are not able to have any kind of connection with the international banking system that banners some money to get to our country, having some impact in the economic development. As Dr. Ileana Morales said before, the government of the United States during these pandemic times have posed some hurdles for the possibilities of having new technologies and treatments to face the pandemic. We have been working with the scientific community, with the private sector, with the research centers to be able to face the pandemic. All possibilities of sending money from the U.S. to Cuba, all these remittances, which are the source of living for different families in Cuba, has been totally prohibited. There are travel restrictions to Cuba, both by sea or air. In the year 2019, no more cruise ships were allowed to dock in Cuba, and this has an impact, of course, in tourism, which is also affected in the rest of the world, but some incomes which were foreseen to be entering the country are now stopped by this blockade. We also have some limitations from the technological viewpoint, as well as some obstacles to access technological platforms. More than 60 informatic programs, systems, and services are not allowed to be used in Cuba. And as we know, in the last times, Cubans are a target of fake news and victims of proliferations of different footage that have been manipulated, that go against the good development of the country. In some research we did from April 2020 up to December 2020, we have been analyzing the economic impact of the blockade imposed by the United States, and that adds more than 3 million US dollars. And considering the accurate impact of the blockade, we're talking about more than 147,000 US dollars. Out of these damages, from the economic impact, the technological impact, we have had some impact as well in trade and in the collection and the possibilities of having some exports performed. We shall also share with you which are the main concepts that have been defined for doing the estimation of these results and damages caused by the impossibility to access the American market. We are talking about $773.5 million, which has not been entering Cuba because of the impact damages that have been caused because of the possibility to access the American market, as well as having some transaction with subsidiary companies, as well as the access to companies based in third countries, as well as the extraterritorial impact of these measures, as well as some other elements that have been considered. Another issue that has been impacted by the blockade is the geographical location of trade. We are seeing an increase of prices of trade, services and goods, which are given having some increased payments by intermediaries, and we have an increase of fleet for those FOB terms, products, as well as fees, expenses on board, storage, and others. We have an increase on prime insurance and cost of immobilization of inventories of resources. We need inventories to be able to face some production services because it's difficult to have international commercialization of our goods, and this of course has an important impact in the use of our products and commercialization. We are talking about $1,073.4 million that have not been used and could have been used if we hadn't have these kind of sanctions. Talking about services, we have damages for the impossibility to purchase spare parts, raw material, products, which specifications cannot be substituted by some other suppliers. And some other products have not been produced in Cuba because the lack of the elements I mentioned before. We have also some impact in health system. 44% of the impact in this sector because of the non-acquisition of products from providers that might directly provide us with some medications as well as some disposable material. If we see the impact of blockade about financial and monetary issues, we have an impact of $404.2 million cost mainly by the exchange rates, depreciation of dollars before the currencies of the main Cuban partners, as well as the high payment of interests higher than the ones established in the international market, as well as persecution of assets, Cuban assets overseas that stop us from having normal relations with American entities in bank institutions. It had some impact as well in exercising the services and rights given to our population. And we are considering damages due to different causes related to the blockade. I'm talking about non-collection of money for arts presentations, as well as copyright and monetary transfers, and some others which have an impact in the internationally recognized rights. We also have to mention the sanctions for remittances sent to Cuba through Cadeca for the population. We have an impact of $12.7 million. And speaking about technological blockade, those are damages to production and services cost by the impossibility to access technical information and to access technologies from American origin, which use less raw materials or energies, as well as the cancellation of some digital websites and the impossibility of using distance services or online events celebration. And all related to the incitation of migration, forced migration. We can also see the impact of blockade, which adds $6.5 million. A number of measures to stop the due functioning of the Cuban economy has been taking place. The American blockade during these pandemic times, and because the impact of COVID-19 internationally and specifically to our country and Cuba, we shall ratify this by the universal access to health, education, culture, sports, justice, insurance, and social assistance. The Cuban economy in the last 5 years have shown total capacity, endurance capacity before the strengthening of the blockade to preserve the conquerors of the revolution. In this framework, and as part of the implementation of what agreed in different congresses of the Communist Party of Cuba, we have approved the National Social Development Plans, which main purposes are going together with the Sustainable Development Agenda of the United Nations. In this national plan, which is done through the Ministry of Economics and Planning, with the participation of different entities from the central administration of the states, national institutions, companies, scientists, researchers, economists, just trying to find the best policies, best actions, trying to find a transformation. And we are doing this with 6 macro programs that are in line with the international concepts linked to environmental protection, national resources protection, going and working with technological progresses and achievements in the world just to serve social justice. But of course, all this need to be perfected. so that we can identify new purposes, new goals, new sustainable goals to transform the current scenario. We need to update the economic and social model in Cuba so that an adequate combination of the centralized planning and the autonomy and decentralization of the entrepreneurial system might be achieved January the 1st of the current year. After working hard, we started with a reordering task, which is not a magic solution to the issues we see in our economy, but that enables us to analyze the performance of different entities. This unification, the national salary, pensions, and social assistance reforms, the eliminations of some free of charge services helping the most vulnerable groups are the measures that have been implemented in this year. And recently, the Council of State passed a number of rules to perfect some economic players, and this is something we have been working for years now. This is not linked to the events, as many say, to the events of July the 11th. This is in line of the social and economic model transformation in Cuba, and we have been working with economists, with people who do some investigation in these regards, and since the month of June, we have been submitting to the international community and to our population. We have been working with total support, legal support, and this might perfect the economic players. So we can say as well that for the first time in Cuba, we legalize the creation of medium, middle, and large and small companies, creating some changes in non-agricultural cooperatives and the not state-owned cooperatives. Those are different models responding to different kind of properties, since they can be private with mixed ownership, and the main purpose is to make that these new kind of companies might be participating in the economic life of the country, and that is betting for the production transformation, not only having an impact in job generation, but also in increasing the GDP of the country. We are to create new industries, new services that did not exist in the country. In the main economic actors or players, we have non-agricultural cooperatives, which are taking new experiences as an experiment since the year 2013. And at present times, they have a legal document with regulations that go in line with micro, medium, and large companies. And those are, there is a social partnerships at present times in the country. We have about 602,000 licenses given, and many of these owners are to turn their business in micro, medium, and large companies or in non-agricultural companies, because we are considering the fact that in self-employment they will be autonomous kind of workers able to contract the services of relatives or other close peoples, and that is going to be a micro, middle, or medium or large company. And for a period of 1 year, these people shall be able to turn these businesses in what is established in the Constitution. We are to say concerning self-employment that there is an opening to the activities which are allowed in these regards. 127 were the ones allowed so far, but now more than 200 different kind of activities shall be allowed in this self-employment sector. We are all trying to find this production chain for the economic and social development of the country. Many of us are talking about this social and economic development, giving services and contributing with the development of our communities and with the social development of our people. So perfecting the economic factors is not limited to macro, medium, and big companies, but also or to self-employment or cooperatives, and also to socialist kind of companies as the main economic player in our country. A number of measures have been adopted to give more autonomy, self-decision power to pay workers, to develop different kind of activities, to distribute utilities related to workers' incomes, as well as some other measures or actions that have been approved in the last year to empower the state companies. Likewise, we would like to refer to one of the priorities in our model, and that is the increase of direct foreign investment that has been affected by the impact of the pandemic. We do not give up on having this kind of possibility in Cuba to contribute with the economic and social development, as well as the strengthening of Mariel Special Economic Zone, which is priority for the government in Cuba, and also to increase national production, export of goods and services. Those are strategies which are to be achieved in our economy and in facing the economic crisis, world crisis. One of the issues we have been also analyzing is the possibilities, the empowerment of municipal governments with the strategies developed in each municipality, and then we are testing the possibilities of our municipal government so that all economic sectors and players might contribute to the economic and social development of the country. All this goes together with the decentralization process, with the competences in our municipalities, which have an impact in our economic and social model. We consider as well that all necessary conditions to make progress in these regards are created, and that the people might have also participation in the different actions and measures that are implemented. And we are confident that measures like this shall contribute to the economic development of the country, acknowledging as well that we have limitation of resources, but we are betting all the time that by the year 2030 we are contributing with the main transformations in the Cuban economy. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas
Thank you, Vice Minister, for your very tight summary of the war that is being waged against from the economic standpoint, but also how is it that our country, in the midst of these horrible conditions imposed by the economic, financial, also technological blockade you also mentioned on Cuba, well, we continue our transformation progress from the economic standpoint, and we make progress to attain that ideal of prosperity that is ahead of us. Well, thank you, Vice Minister, once again. And now I would like to give the floor to our panel member that is not from Cuba. I would like to thank the next panel member. I would like to thank the economist Gabriela Cultelli from Uruguay. Gabriela knows Cuban reality, but at the same time she knows about Latin American reality under these horrible circumstances imposed by COVID-19 that affect the whole country, but specifically our region. So I would like her to give us her vision of these issues. Of course, we'd like her to share her viewpoint. Thank you. Greetings from Uruguay, greetings Cuba, and especially to the resilient Cuban women whose federation reached another university yesterday. Thank you again for this invitation. My aim is not to conduct a finished analysis with the effects of the blockade, mostly with Kabir Milder, she made a summary on this topic, not about the world crisis and the problems in the region either, because it would be impossible actually to tackle this in such a short period of time. But it's always good to reason about it, to recall some issues, mostly at times in which the economic war against Cuba has become also a media war. When we deal with the effects that the blockade may have, that it's impossible not to mention the blockade. It is important to observe the social relations that are intercepted on it, mostly those that have to do with the asymmetries. The very blockade reproduces on a blockade country, an attack country. The blockade affects those under aggression, while the aggressor enjoys very favorable economic conditions. Among the countless fallacies, I'm going to be brief, but we have to mention something about this, that we see on the media. There's something that called my attention. They deny the blockade. They say, between quotations, the situation of Cuba has nothing to do with the blockade. In our opinion, saying that is to say there's no world market. It's like saying there is no the dollar pattern, or that the world exchange currency is not important. A currency that is a way to reproduce power structures worldwide. People who praise markets forget all the period of replacement of one empire by another one, and with that, the replacement of the gold pattern or sterling pound pattern or the dollar pattern, where after Bretton Woods agreements, Second World War, Plan Marshall, they filled the world with dollars, and they created in 1971 the incompatibility of the currency, and that currency was turned into a world country because it was supported with the labor of all workers in the world, but handled from the U.S. Federal Reserve. Dollar is an expression of value, of expropriation of it at the whole world, no doubt. But this is the currency for global exchange, whether they like it or not. So limiting the tendency of this currency is to limit the exchange with the world and to limit the development by all the dialectics that comprises the productive cycle, mostly at times of globalization. On top of this, as our comrade Mildred said, all the commercial hurdles when it comes to bridging raw materials, inputs, sales of production, and Cuban services. We have to consider the weight of health services and the balance of payment, as we have to say, we have to see the attacks against Cuban doctors. We have to see that they want to undermine the trust. And then they talk about the economy as something isolated from politics. So there's another proof that the economy separated from politics cannot be considered a sign. This scourge that has been in place for over 60 years, we have to see on top of it the world crisis, part of the ways of capitalist functioning that were processed even before this crisis started in the year prior to the pandemic in 2019. With the pandemic, it was further strengthened. What I've said is not minor, both to measure its consequence or to project its possible duration. The recovery as a rebound was not adjusted to was never adjusted to this cycle, at least in this continent. In 2020, the fall of domestic GDP was almost 9%, 5.5%. There were budget cuts, there was increasing social gaps in all kinds, and they were further strengthened. On top of this, we saw the push of telework that is here to stay. Bear in mind the digital divide between men and women, ethnic, races, social sectors. These are gaps that at the same time separate even more the levels of development between the countries, the regions, or inside these same countries and regions. Inequality is the key word. A key word that Cuba denies to respect or refuses to respect. So in a way, Kabir Morales talked about this in her speech. So this is the word today. And in Latin America, the situation, it was not better. GDP fell over the fall in the 30s, when the so-called big degradation from 29 to 33 at that time was 5.3%. In 2020, according to ECLAC, was 6.8 fall. So we talk about a 10-year delay of growth in the region, and its recovery seems will reach in 2022, and there were people that will not even face recovery. Among the countries that with the greatest fall is Venezuela, also under the blockade, with a fall of 30% of its production. Argentina with over 10, and Mexico over 9. Bear in mind, out of the commercial trade of Cuba, almost 1/3 is with Latin America, according to data from the National Statistics Office and information from Cuba. So here in Uruguay, a country of 3.5 million inhabitants, we woke up suddenly in the midst of a brutal problem with a neoliberal government and over 100,000 poor people. We had people spots everywhere because people extended solidarity with those people. Late vaccination campaigns to try to save. By 31st of December, we only had 181 deaths. Today, over 6,000 deaths we have, with peaks in the month of April and May. We've seen a reduction in July after a result of the vaccination, and now in August. And a couple of days ago, we haven't had deaths. But out of the 6,000 deaths, over 1,000 in a small country of 3.5 million inhabitants. The 1,000 could have been avoided if capital should not prevail over human life. That the mass media, they decide to minimize just to forget afterwards. And this year, and worldwide, the crisis and the pandemic affected tourism first and foremost, cultural industry, transportation associated to the tourism sector, apart from trade. These are sectors that employ many women. That's why we see an expansion in these gaps. And sectors that are of key importance for the Cuban economy that suffer a fall of 10.9% in 2020. From that same source, I found the number of visitors of 2020 was a reduction of 70%. It's not the same, the reduction of the tourism sector in a country like Cuba than in a country like ours, like Uruguay, like Mexico, Argentina, because of the weight that that sector has in the whole economy. We have world crisis, pandemic, and blockade. Mildred talked about this, the 243 measures, new ideas over the last few years imposed by the Trump government. Well, it should be very difficult, for example. We thought about this. We have been working for several years in this field. We think about how difficult it should be for the planning tasks and the economic outlook, both at the macro level and the micro level. And the important thing, how important is planning for development of services and for social service at large. All this with the aftermath and we see the losses that they have suffered, and on top of this they add lack of stability. Tourism in Cuba has many benefits. One of them, safety, stability. So episodes like the one in July do not help. But before we begin, I would like to take this book and to quote a phrase by Eduardo Galeano. Mirrors an almost universal story. Biglietti gave it to me as a present, and Daniel Biglietti sent it to me as a gift, and he's a friend of Cuba. And Galeano says, in page 387, and this is a story called Fidel. I'm just going to read a small excerpt. And in this, Fidel is, and Galeano says, and they don't say that this revolution that grew under punishment and what could have been, and they don't say that the wall between the desire and reality was higher and wider thanks to the imperial blockade. And they don't say that in spite of all, in spite of the aggressions from outside, this island that has been suffering but is stubborn and happy at the same time has generated the Latin American society that is less unfair. And its enemies do not say that this feat was the device of the sacrifice of its people, but it was also the result of the stubborn will, the sense of honor of this gentleman that always favored the losers, as his famous colleague of the field of Castilla. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to Gabriela. Thanks a lot for taking to this table things said by Galeano and by our beloved singer Daniel Biglietti. And not only for speaking about this book, but also about the publishing that Casa de las Américas did about this book, a way of sharing Latin American literature. We are accompanied in this room, though they are not seen in camera, by Abel Prieto, president of Casa de las Américas and president of the organization of journalists Ronquillo, as well as Luis Morlota Rivas. He is online. they are participating in the network of these organizations that have made possible this encounter. We remind you all that those watching the panel can ask questions through the chats both in YouTube or make some comments in Facebook broadcasting. Some people are reading those comments. They are sending them to us through the internal chat and to those who are in the room. And we shall be speaking on economics once again. One of the adverse expressions from the imperialism towards Cuba in the last times had some impact about the perception of the economy and how the transformations of the Cuba economy are seen. As Gabriela said, they are not acknowledging the blockade that we have been talking about in this meeting. And now we shall listen to the young economic student and member of the Association of Economists and Accountants of Cuba, Ernesto Marili Domenech, who is also working in some projects and investigations and research as a way to see how the university students in the last times, maybe during COVID-19 times, have been linked to the transformation process we are performing in Cuba. Thank you very much for inviting me to take the floor in this occasion. I'll make my best. I'll do my best to be able to exchange this knowledge. It's a duty of our Cuban revolutionary to share the truth about our country and the efforts and endeavors made by our country and our people. And it's difficult for me to take the floor now after listening to three important and outstanding women in Cuba. As Deputy Minister Mildred said before, the economic blockade have been the perfect storm we have been living in at least since the year 2018, when the strengthening of the U.S. administration against Cuba reached a point that had never been reached in prior administrations, because there are two important elements: the activation of the Belt-Hampton tracks and also the restrictions in fuel supply. So in the year 2019, Cuba decreased, after 26 years, its GDP in a process that in Cuba called the juncture, or the specific moment in which we had lack of fuel in Cuba. That stopped meeting the economic plans for the year 2019, and we decreased 0.2%. And there was great problems and tensions in the national economy. In the first quarter in the year 2020, there was a light increase, and after that there was a decreasing process given the contraction of incomes or in foreign currency because of the crisis caused by the pandemic, and especially with the reduction of incomes due to tourism. And Cuba, the GDP decreased in 10%, but our exports decreased in about 20%. In the world, those processes brought about important unemployment levels, as well as social exclusion, and the policies that the Cuban government implemented were to take unemployment to the lowest rates possible. And of course that had economic impact, since many of the costs that were taken in the shoulders as a population in some other countries were assumed or taken by the government in Cuba. So transformations were taking place under the name of reordering process. That was a process studied since the year 2010. And this closes a cycle of exchange, monetary transformations that were taking place with a double currency used in Cuba. This was an important transformation in the national economic model, since that challenged a number of important changes to be performed in the national economy. This process had important changes: unification of exchange rate, increase of salaries, unification of money, of currencies, and a reduction of subsidies in the country. The purpose of this reordering was to unify the different loops of money in which the Cuban economy was divided. I mean, one of the sectors had dollars and the other one was making payments in a rate of 1 per 24. So there was a deep transformation of a way of distributing wealth, and that was based in subsidies that were present in the Cuban economy, but in the last years were generating different changes, not fair for the way the Cuban economy was developing, and also because of the low salaries and the non-motivation for working. It was necessary to have some changes in salaries. There were complicated changes. The president of the country also made some call to listen to the opinions given by the people, to listen to the measures that were implemented at some point, and this reordering task had some problems in the implementation. Some of those were transformed, and listening to the people was important, though was not totally, this implementation was not totally successful as we expected, and many people in the country consider that there was a neoliberal kind of measure. But indeed, the opinion matrix against Cuba related to this reordering process was a kind of event in the world. Initially, not all the processes were understood, but then little by little more clarity was seen on all these processes. Reordering, people consider, is necessary for the Cuban economy as a way to transform all these accusations against the Cuban government. But we were having these debates. They were saying that Cuba was a country with neoliberal measures, a country that has been fighting for measures to benefit the country and the people, and then this negative matrix that was implemented against Cuba was creating some concerns. This neoliberal package, they call, was considered indeed a capacity to destroy the possibility of the workers to face what done by the government. And specific and important examples, which is usually mentioned, is that the salary in Cuba represented about 20% of the incomes of the population at times when subsidies are given in a considerable way in the country. So the role of the population represented more than 60% of the population, which was important for main transformations. And I guess Deputy Minister Mildred mentioned this before, and I shall take some of those mentioned before. One is to decentralize the socialist enterprise in Cuba. This also speaks about the possibility of the Cuban state to perform different and implement different measures, not only because they own, or the government own the means of production, but also because they're able to make policies. And this is an important matter that needed to have some transformation. These measures are to be efficient and effective in taking welfare to the population. In the last semester, there is a flexibilization or a flexible viewpoint, as well as giving some empowerment to the companies which were centralized. Some other changes are related to the increase of salaries, as well as the elimination of some hurdles and restrictions which were inherited from the times when we have a centralization of faculties. The second important measure, which is essential, are the transformations taking place in the agriculture in Cuba. This is one of the greatest problems we have had in the last years, which is restricted, limited by the lack of new technologies, modern technologies, but we need to do our best efforts to change economy. This is a commitment of the government with the people, and this have meant the elimination of obstacles, the elimination of accumulation of products in specific groups, the possibility of different companies to participate in agriculture. We have reviewed the very, very, very high prices of the products in agriculture. We have prioritized or analyzed the ways of commercialization. We have as well reduced taxes, and we have performed an important transformation in agriculture. That was important for the economy. The other two important measures that have been implemented and were already mentioned by the Deputy Minister Mildred are related to the change and enhancement of the economic models for them to contribute with the national interests. And the last measure have the centralization of foreign currency, which at times of scarcity of products, we have implemented these measures, and this is an important limitation. Taking foreign currency to those who can export has been one of the main purposes or tasks in the last times. Those activities have brought about a lot of impacts in the population. We have negative and positive opinions that have spoken about the possibility of having this dialogue with the population. The president of the country have met different sectors of a population to convey the message of the logic of our process that is led to transform what we are, and also to update the essence and to keep the essence. I believe this is the main lead of our transformations that for coming years are going to be divided into main ideas. One, to survive a short time COVID-19. This is one of the main purposes we have, at least for the Cuban economy, the recuperation, the recovery for the year 2022 is essential. And also to have a new system, working system, that beyond the transformations in macro programs, in development plans, we have the need in Cuba to have a new working system focused on long terms. In Cuba, in Latin America, we were pioneers in developing long-term development strategies. So since 1980, we had a plan for the year up to the year 1991, and we have renewed some long-term plans. And this is the transformation in our working schemes, which has enabled us to make our working schemes flexible, as well as a way to face long-term and short-term plans and to perform these transformations in a better manner, because in some occasions our transformation in policies were not present, and with the national plan for development for the year 2030 we will have achieved better results. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Joel. No doubt we have to continue denouncing the blockade, but at the same time we cannot stop the transformations. We cannot do away with the way we think about the future, and we'll leave the present as well. And I think that in the previous presentations we have seen the approach on the economy, and we have seen how they depict the major challenges and the tasks that we have to carry out, the tasks that we're currently developing. As Joel said, they're all the time under debate with the population. At the same time, whenever we need to readdress, in the morning before I came here at the University of Havana, there were, Prime Minister Joanna was addressing the topic of the young actors, the small and medium-sized economies. It was a very important debate. So thank you, and I would like to thank the youngsters for the participation in this process. I would like to thank you, Joel, for your testimony in this regard. So now we have a new footage. So we will hear to testimony by Dr. Herminia Palenzuela Lopez, specialist from the Pediatric Cardio Center, Williamsburg. This is one of the institutions in Cuba that faces the blockade every single day, and from one of the most sensitive approaches when it has to do with the life of small children, of newborns. So let's take a look at this footage. I'm Dr. Valenzuela Lopez, specialist in pediatrics, devoted to children heart care. This is the National Center to take care of all pediatric patients who are born with congenital cardiovascular issues that are present at this age. This is quite difficult, specialized, that requires high cost inputs, and we've had to develop these buying the inputs in faraway countries with higher transportation costs, etc. And this, of course, affects the possibility to give our patients the best possible care. There are situations, they're worse. There's certain medication, like Pristine, and the newborns' life depend on them, the ones who are born with critical cardiopaths. So they have to refer to the cardio center as soon as possible, but they come from faraway places, so they have to have that treatment for them not to die in the transport, so that they can get the proper treatment. It generates a lot of tension if all inputs are necessary, but there are certain situations in which it's a life of death. When there's a delay, we see an increase in the delay because of the pandemic. We're concerned because we do not know if we're going to run out of this medication before we get our next order. If we had good relation with the United States, in a matter of hours, the medication could be in the country. This is just one example, but I could place many other examples. I could share with you, for example, the scientific exchange that we could have with the United States, a country with such a huge development where there are high-level scientific events, but we Cubans cannot attend these events to get an update on new procedures and techniques that could be very beneficial for the health of our patients. So in short, we're affected by the blockade earlier, but in the midst of the pandemic, the situation is worse because Cuba has seen a reduction of in revenues, we have very little tourism. So we have to spend more resources to fight against the pandemic, but nevertheless, not even under these circumstances, the U.S. government has been able to soften the blockade. This is something that cannot be understood. If you're concerned to guarantee human rights of the Cuban people, how come they violate the main right, the right to life of health? I think it's cruel and it's hypocritical at the same time.
Sí. Bueno, sí.
Well, let's continue with our the last member of the panel. Before we go to the round of questions, I'd like to remind you that you can send your questions. But our last speaker is the professor of Public International Law from the University of Havana, Ernesto Moreira. He is a member of the Cuban Society of International Law of the Union of Cuban Jurists. So you have the floor, Professor. Welcome, Professor, to our panel. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for this invitation. I'm going to start. When we take a look at the coverage given to the problems faced by Cuba at the moment, the situations that we have had in the country, most of the time when we take a look at the unilateral coercive measures applied by the U.S. government to Cuba, most of the time when they refer to it, they only refer to the claim by the Cuban government on the role that this has on the country's situation. Very rarely they talk about this directly as one of the causes of the situations that we're facing nowadays in the country that no doubt are very difficult. Well, not to consider this as the only cause of the difficulties that we face. It's not the only one. There are external causes. There are causes that could not be foreseen, like the very pandemic of coronavirus. Also have to do with our own shortages that we have to overcome, we ourselves. But not to undermine these factors, we cannot set up the equation of Cuba's situation today without bringing into the equation this system of unilateral coercive measures applied by the U.S. governments against our country. And taking this context and the way they have been focusing this topic, and they directly undermine this, I thought that the most important thing to do, I would like to share with you some statements, some scenarios that have been built in this analysis conducted by the press or statements in social media as to the role of these measures when it comes to Cuban reality or its nature. And they should be reviewed and should be disassembled. I have 5 of them mostly. The first will be on the fact that this measure system that is applied on us is the result of the expropriations made by Cuba in the first year of the revolution, and the U.S. is just want to pay back because of the damage caused to them at the time. This is most likely the most the issue to refuse. We have the Maglery in 1960. It was made clear that what we're trying to do was to provoke economic crisis inside Cuba, based on which they would generate rejection to the government, and they would create a social and political situation that would favor the fall of the political order that was in Cuba at that time. So, to begin with, there's a clear confession that the intention behind these economic measures and unilateral coercive measures go beyond the payback that they could have received from the nationalization that was conducted in the first years of the revolution. But there's more. If we take into account the Torricelli Act in the early 90s, we see that this law is not just a package of economic measures. The first chapter had to do with the second chapter. There are measures that are just to provoke a change of regime in the country. They're not isolated. They're part of a same amendment. The so-called Torricelli Act is a single system, but even more self-evident is the Helms-Burton Act, that so far is the greatest code that they have had of this system of measures. We take into account Title II. We see that in Title II there are mostly no economic measures. The pressure measures are in Title I. Title II is just addressed to structure a change of regime in Cuba, to define this as something very precise. And this is just an exalt to read this. It has been said by non-Cuban authors, no legislation from the U.S. at all. The ones they have so many. They put in such detail how they should consider the political system in another country, and they do that from their internal law. But in Title II, there's nothing related to paybacks or expropriations, just to design the political system in Cuba based on their own knowledge. Title III apparently is more related to nationalizations when it comes to payback. When we study the subject, that we see in the text of the law are statements that were made when the law was being passed through the U.S. Congress, that beyond that, there was an objective to prevent the arrival of foreign investment in Cuba, to prevent the Cuban economy from recovering from the economic crisis that they faced in the early 90s, with a special period in foreign investment was the main way out that turned or helped Cuban recovery at the time. So the attempt was to cut that possibility through the Title III of the Act that favored these lawsuits against Cuba, companies that were investing in Cuba in the very first years of the revolution. So if we take into account more recent times, over 200 measures passed by Donald Trump administration, when they talk about the how intentioned these measures were, they only refer to blocking the Cuban government. The central access have been blocking the access of the Cuban government to foreign currency. They did not talk about payback because of property that was nationalized. So they just want to just the payback. This is not sustained by any of these measures. It has also been said there's no such a blockade, because Cuba can trade with any other country. Cuba is not forced to trade with the United States. They can trade with other countries and solve their own problems beyond. In previous speakers, certain goods and services can only be acquired in the U.S. market. And when they apply these measures on us, they block Cuba's access to them. But beyond that, it is true, Cuba could trade with other countries, with non-U.S. companies, but Cuba cannot do it with an asset that have 10% of more of U.S. components. So you have to think about this, about a transnational economy, and under which the U.S. has the greatest GDP in the country and the second commercial power. So how difficult it is to have access to goods and services in which there's no U.S. components. On top of that, and this was also addressed by previous speaker, Cuba cannot trade with the U.S. currency, with dollars. So we can say that they issue the dollars and they have the right to decide which states can trade with this currency or not. But this is a simplest and partial vision of this topic, as it was already expressed by a previous speaker. The U.S. managed by means of the Bretton Woods system to turn dollar into the currency of international use. So most economic transactions are conducted in dollars. Since Cuba cannot have access to international trade, we are forced to conduct a number of operations to change currencies that make the process more expensive. But let's say we managed to access to the asset. We managed to get a provider. That vessel, as it was said before, has to wait for 6 months before they can dock on Cuban or U.S. ports. So the company, they do not want to conduct the transaction of Cuba because they do not want to undertake this cost. To not to have access to the U.S. for 6 months, or our costs are higher. On top of that, we have the issue of the boats. They do not dare to undertake commercial operations with Cuba because if they have any U.S. presence and any important vessel has important relations with the U.S. and they are subject to fines by the Treasury Department. So it's very difficult to know when there are sanctions because there are so many standards within this system of measure, and it's so complex. It's not just the Helms-Burton Act. We have Torricelli, the Treasury Department, the law of trade with the enemy, the provisions when it comes to the inclusion of Cuba of countries that sponsor terrorism. And it creates such a number of standards in order to know about this. So we have to devote a life of research to analyze all these systems. And quite often the banks, instead not to actually have to read all these standards. On top of that, Cuba is not as a big market or perhaps attractive when it comes to international trade. They just decide everything to have to do with Cuba. They just put it aside. It has all been said, when we apply this system of measures, the U.S. is not violating anything because each country has the right to decide who they want to trade with. If the U.S. does not want to trade with Cuba, no one can force them to do so. That is true. If the U.S. does not want to trade with Cuba under the international law, they cannot engage in trade. But first, the end. We cannot forget that this system of measure has the end, has been clearly stated to lead to a change of regime in Cuba. This is an end that is illicit when it comes to international law, because against the principle of equal sovereignty of states, and it's against this principle of not interference in domestic states. So the political regime in Cuba is up to the Cuban society to determine. And another state should not decide what is the political, economic, or social regime that should exist in Cuba. So a packet of economic measures that is one to attain this change in regime is illicit when it comes to international law. Also, we see the scope. It tries to control the behavior of economic actors that are not U.S. or are not closely linked to the U.S. We could quote the same boats or the vessels. Vessels should not be from U.S. shipping companies. Banks have received fines like BNP Paribas in 2015. They applied a fine, a multi-million fine. We could see the example of foreign investors just because they invest in a property that in the early times of revolution was owned by another person that at the time was no U.S. citizen, but after they became U.S. citizen, but they are exposed to a lawsuit in U.S. courts that might cost a lot of money. And on top of that, there is a matter in which we see that they go beyond the bilateral relations between the Cuba and the U.S. We see an interest to have an influence on the system of international relations as a whole to affect Cuba. So we see with the same objective the use of the same position that U.S. has in international market that is advantageous as a leverage, as a weapon against Cuba. And we see, for example, how they forbid the use of dollars. They do not allow access to international monetary system because the financial systems worldwide, IMF and the World Bank, it is true that these are international organizations and the U.S. does not define the membership of this organization, but since the rights are determined on the economic participation, so the U.S. take advantage of the fact they have the greater capacity to contribute and they have a higher voting power within these institutions, and the opposition of the U.S., when it comes to Helms-Burton Act. So basically, this becomes a veto power that they have, and it's at some point the Cuba would like to access this financial mechanism. Cuba cannot do it because the U.S. forbids this. So there's another issue. The design of this system of unilateral coercive measures violates the jurisdiction of the Cuban state. So there is a principle of the immunity of state. So a state cannot just in its own course another state because of attitudes that act of sovereignty. This could be done because of act of trade. But in the case of Cuban institutions, because these have to do with Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, in the case of expropriation, this is Juris Petty Act. So it's not Juris Petty or Juris Christiani, but the United States have the right to judge in their courts acts conducted by the Cuban state in the exercise of a right. This is forbidden by international law. Apart from this, we see the non-tariff trade to international trade. This was part of a lawsuit under the World Trade Organization as a result of the Helms-Burton Act. We also have the issue. There are issues that have to do with domestic law in the U.S. They have talked about how is it that Congress, through the Helms-Burton Act, they kidnap constitutional powers from the U.S. president, and there is a political approach within the U.S. system, mostly when it comes to the Helms-Burton Act, that puts the courts to undertake a political function because the Title III are not to undertake justice or law, but it's a political purpose to forbid the arrival of foreign investment in Cuba. So there is a political approach here when it comes to the U.S. apparatus in the U.S. that, of course, affect the logics behind the power splitting in this institutional system in the U.S. It has also been said there's no such a blockade because the U.S. is the main supplier of food to Cuba, and medication are the exception. So Cuba could have access to medicines and food in the U.S. market. The first is true. Yes, we have food from the U.S., but we have to see the conditions and how the operations have to be conducted, quite often they have to pay in cash, and conditions that no other country is subject to. In the case of medication, it is true that medication is the exception, but the problem is that the bureaucratic fabric that we have to undergo so that these medicines can be exported to Cuba, so bypassing the regulations of these coercive unilateral measures is so complex that it's very difficult to see. So we have to prove that such medicines are not going to serve in no way to, for example, the Genetic Engineering Center mostly to different restrictions that make difficult that they can arrive, and in short we see this idea and what has been applied against Cuba is just a commercial embargo. There's no blockade, this is a commercial embargo by the U.S. First, what is an embargo first? An embargo is a measure that just to take care or to anticipate to another situation that could take place. Let's say now We see a divorce, and there are certain assets that are of common property. So there is a previous embargo measure, so nobody can take advantage of these assets unless or once the situation is solved. So we call it embargo because the measures are adopted on Cuban assets are brought after the expropriations that took place in the very years of the first years of the revolution. But this is no longer sustained. First, because we talked about this, the end of these measures that just to ensure assets for a possible decision on a topic or the resolution of a conflict, we are saying that there is an aim of regime change, and an embargo has nothing to do with that. And in the previous presentation we see the multi-dimensional approach of these measures. All the environments that they cover, they far exceed the dimension and the scope of a measure of embargo. So the topic, the term is embargo, cannot be applied to it. We have preferred, at least from a technical standpoint, I think the most exact term, unilateral coercive measure. Colloquially, the term blockade is used, but certainly embargo, they cannot call this embargo. This is a term that is well below the fact. They talk about the embargo against Cuba. When they do in the same term, they soften the scope of this. So this is a term whose use has a political effect. Well, I think we have covered the 5 major fallacies that have been handled. I mean, not all, perhaps, but the ones that from our field of knowledge we can comprise. So we have the idea that the blockade does have an influence of economic relations. As I said before, it's not everything, but it's an important, a significant part of that whole. So the best thing that we could do is to defeat the blockade from here, from the inside. We have to make progress without fears and with, of course, and with the very measures that we have decided to take, and we know they're essential for our future. And we have to change anything have to be changed, and we have to emancipate by ourselves. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Ernesto.
Thanks a lot, Ernesto. Ernesto had to make the presentation in a fast way because some other professor was supposed to be here. But we hope that the person who was supposed to be here, who is sick, might recover very soon. He has taken this responsibility of making this presentation, mainly referring to the coercive kind of measures implemented by the United States towards Cuba. We speak about blockade, and many people might think these are measures against the government, but not against the people of Cuba. But people and government in Cuba are unity, are absolutely going together. So let's have a questions and answers session. I see some comments. Hopefully Ileana Morera might be with us once again. But immediately let's share the testimony of Eugenio Selman Hussein, director of the Heart Pediatric Center, William Soler. Let's listen to his message. I'm Eugenio Selman Hussein Sosa. I'm a surgeon from the Heart Center, William Soler in Havana, Cuba for 17 years now. The impact of this criminal blockade of the United States against Cuba is a genocidal act, particularly with children who have some disease conditions and their relatives. Lots of statistics and economic estimations might be done, but it's impossible to think about the suffering that represents for patients, for their relatives, and also for the medical staff that work for saving the lives of these children. There is no policy that might justify this damage caused to innocent children. About the policy of the United States toward Cuba based on the prohibition of trading with the enemy. Children cannot be considered the enemy. In this heart center, we have been supporting the claim of Cuba, the motion of Cuba to stop the economic, financial, and commercial blockade of the United States against Cuba. And we have been asking even President Obama the lifting of the blockade. Nothing has been done. And being President Donald Trump in office from the European Union, where we were invited to participate together with European members of parliament, we requested President Donald Trump to do something to avoid this non-human suffering of children and Cuban children and families. We take this opportunity that we really thank to request President Joseph Biden to determine some measures to eliminate, to lift this immoral, unfair, and criminal and cruel blockade of the United States against Cuba. We would like to thank the statement of doctors, outstanding professors and doctors from Cuba that accompanied us in this panel. And we have been receiving some greetings through different platforms from the Cultural Association Jose Martí in Rio de Janeiro, from the Friendship House, House of Friendship in Argentina, greetings from Holland, from the network in Defensa de la Humanidad, from Argentina with the Cuba-Venezuela Solidarity Group, from Guatemala as well, from the National Association Italy Cuba, as well as from some Cuban organizations, CTC, some radio stations from Santi Espiritu, from El Yayabo. They have been following us, and there are different messages in the Jitsi. Perhaps we are able to see the images, the full screen images, perhaps going to the first ones. Good afternoon, everyone. We are broadcasting.
Gracias a la preclara visión de
Thanks to the clear vision of Fidel, you have biotechnology of Fidel Castro, you have biotechnology development. Good afternoon, everyone. We have these greetings from Bolivar and Zamora from Venezuela. Miriam Alvarez also conveys her greetings. This kind of testimony, someone says it's important to measure the damages of the blockade. We suffer that when there are no medications. I believe it refers to the testimony from doctors. Different measures are included in the blockade. Some American customers reject the opportunity to have exchange with Cuba. Miriam asks if the dollars proceeding from these sanctions goes to the federal bank to the United States. There is a comment through YouTube or Facebook by Atilio Boron. He has made some comment. He says, blockade is a lesser humanidad crime which is condemned in different measures of the international law and in the Assembly General of the United Nations. There are groups of solidarity, and there is a question of Carmen Ginis from Brazil. She says, some people say that with the COVID hadn't been good to make changes, economic changes. Do you think you have to wait for the end of the pandemic to implement these measures? Some other people ask, what's the opinion of members of panel about this management and property possibilities and more presence of the market? And with the possibility of keeping, I do not properly understand the question or the drafting, or perhaps it's related to the contradictions of the cultural and economic perspectives of socialism. I think we are beginning with Deputy Minister here. Good afternoon again. About the question that we are able to say where the money from the sanctions goes. Imposed to international banks. If that money goes to the federal banks, we cannot say it's true or not, but these fines, these sanctions exist. These strengthen and limit the situation, the impossibility of Cuba to have trade with other countries and to have accounts and to be able to purchase raw materials with from other entities. That, of course, limits the social and economic development of the country. We were analyzing the perfect 10 of the economic players. We consider them the socialist companies, non-state-owned companies, but these are part of the economic model so stated and considered in the Congress of the 8th Congress of the party, and it's also seen in the economic and social strategy passed last year in the midst of the economic crisis due to COVID-19. Recently it was passed a legal and ruling group of functions to help the vision of the nation we have and to help the national development program. So there is no contradiction on what we have included in the Constitution, and that's why we are saying that the process of changes is taking place. So far we have non-state-owned ways of companies, but we have new concepts now. Self-employed people have an autonomous position. This is a new economic player for Cuba to have the micro, medium, and large enterprises. It might be a combination of state-owned and private companies, but this is all to be able to develop economy in the country. This is a new kind of process, gradually implemented. We have to monitor some organizations and implementation issues, but all the time is to perfect the economic and social model in Cuba. We have considered these as important players. We were talking about the decentralization of foreign currency, and in the new players there is decentralization of currency as well, because of the need to be able to achieve equity in these sectors. we are working hard, and everyone should increase the production, national production, the substitution of imports, and to give high quality services to the population. So there is no contradiction in our socialist model, since this is a vision of our non-state management ways implemented in the socialist system we have in Cuba. And about the reordering system, and I gotta give the floor to Ernesto afterwards. Some people asked if this was the right time to implement these changes. We have been analyzing for 10 years now in a multidisciplinary group, including economists and people dealing with socialist issues. We had to analyze the socialist character of all these measures, and during the celebration of the Congress of the party, we started analyzing this. This is not a process that has ended. It started in January the 1st, 2021, but it takes a gradual implementation of actions. This is the first stage. This is not a magic solution to the problems we have in Cuba. We have to analyze organization processes and the main production processes and services rendering in our country. But we needed to have reordering to make transparent all the commercial activities and to achieve relations with overseas. Cuba has a small kind of economy depending on exports. With this currency reordering, we try to achieve better results in company and how to contribute with the social and economic development in Cuba. There might be different subjective kind of opinions about what is appropriate or not, but we thought necessary conditions were created for its implementation and for the main transformations that step by step shall be implemented in the last year. And we believe we are making progress towards the best final results. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Joel. Do you have a microphone there? I totally agree with Deputy Minister Mildred. Reordering plan, if we were to find the best conditions, perhaps in these under blockade conditions, perhaps we hadn't been able to reach the best moment for the implementation of this reordering. But economists before were talking about how to have fund capacities to palliate devaluation, strikes, and we had international funds as advisors. But in Cuba, we didn't have these possibilities. We have to find our own domestic reserves. So pandemic was a difficult aspect, and it's difficult to see why it's difficult to have this recovery. In reordering task was to measure the economy in a coherent manner, seeing what companies were having some contribution with the economy. We're trying to find efficiency and more productivity, how to be able to find more experts, and how to create incentives for the exports. And on the other hand, it enabled us to have some currency context to be the basis for new transformations. the transformations we need in Cuba were not able to be performed without reordering, or we wouldn't be able to have changes without perfecting the players, because the economic non-state-owned and state-owned players function with two currencies. So to be able to make progress in this regard, and for instance, 700 Cuban pesos were the same as $700. So there was no competition in this currency or monetary context. And in issues related to salaries and to be able to find efficiency, this was not possible. And there is a criticism. People say that reordering may worsen the Cuban situation, but I do not coincide with this opinion, because the difficulties that Cuba is facing today might be present with or without reordering. I consider that this reordering plan made state workers to face in a positive way this situation of lackness, of shortness during pandemic times. So the economic situation for 2020 might have been difficult to be faced, and reordering made the economic situation in better conditions, both for the budgeted sector and also for the state sector that might have been affected by inflation, which is created by the lackness of products and services and goods. And this was seen in the general economy and specific workers to face the situation, the economic situation, which was present already in Cuba.
Well, there was a question, you referred to it in your previous talk. You said that the president said that we had to conduct this. So, a monetary ordinance, as we said before, it was prepared for 10 years, but the monetary ordinance was thought since 2004. We knew that we were going to have two currencies, but at some point in time we have to leave this behind. This was a scheme, and we started working in 2004, in 2011, when the update of the model took place. And this last period, many things were taken to a theoretical level that has certain level of planning, but this is a process that is extremely complex. So we knew beforehand that requirements were going to be in. Nobody thought it was going to be perfect, and it was not the aim. The monetary ordinance task was to have different interactions to achieve a balance little by little. And these obviously, in the beginning, there were more mistakes when it came to the practical implementation of this monetary ordering task. But later on, and the president called on people to listen to the people. The most important criticism could not be learned sitting in an office. So we had to go out and learn about what people had to say in different neighborhoods. But in the first 3-4 months, the adjustments were made. The first 4 months, there were constant meetings to update, to correct processes in agriculture, industry, export, things that were thought beforehand that could have a certain level of approach or right approach, but the conditions dictated that it was not the case. So this was updated in a way, but of course it required very very subtle adjustments. So in 21, the adjustments were made over time. Well, would you like to say something? We have many members of the panel, people who are online with us. On this gypsy chat room, and this is the time in which they can also take the floor, ask questions, make comments. Greeting from Manuel Santos. Urrueta. Greetings from the Forum of Artists and the Network in Defense of Humanity, cultural work that we have ahead of us, where we see the harassment of the U.S. We have to listen to the revolutionary youth, the doctors of Cuba. These are the cultural practice. Thank you, Manuel Santo. I see a message for Lid Maria from the Martí program. And we have now Dr. Ileana Morales. One of the questions was for you. We were talking about economics, but one of the most important subjects that we have addressed have to do essentially with the way the blockade affects Cuba, the everyday life of Cuban people. One of the questions had to do precisely, in one way the blockade has had an impact on health, and what's the current impact on health by the blockade. We heard to Dr. Guillermo from nephrology, two doctors for the cardio center from William Soler Pediatric Hospital, and now we would like to hear you about this. Well, good afternoon once again. If the professors, our dear professors, talked about this, I'm sure they placed concrete examples. Perhaps I could share with you the following: the effects of the blockade in all sectors. I'm going to refer to health care. That is the most sensitive issue among the different areas hit by the blockade. This has had an accumulative effect. I think we can say that now it is perhaps the most genocidal expression of that blockade. There's no other word to call it. We see the reinforcement of the blockade that was cruel, unfair, unjustifiable in the past, but at times of COVID-19, this is genocide. We have to say this up front. We have to know about this, and we have to denounce it. But if that blockade that is already genocidal in the midst of the pandemic has a cumulative effect of 60 years that have been having an impact every single year to, let's say, get state-of-the-art technology, the medication that is perhaps one of a kind. Bear in mind that the medication have to do with genre in the market, so you have limited financing for a different activity, and you have to buy something that is top priority to save a life on the other side of the world, where perhaps it is 5 times more expensive and to transport it. So at times of a pandemic that is a health crisis worldwide that is unprecedented, it has catastrophic effects. So we could place many examples. How is it that Cuba, perhaps in my initial words, I read them, but perhaps I would have liked to speak about this, but how is it that Cuba has been able to overcome this situation? And Cuba has the possibility to have capabilities and domestic resources, to foster training rather than resources. Our professionals are very well trained, and they do their best in the face of the scarce resources that we have. Sometimes we have just indispensable resources to cure or to treat a pathology. And we're talking about a disease that we all know about this. Perhaps if people like to read know that this is a disease, and there are many diseases in just one. I'm saying I'm going to buy antibiotics to see if I improve. I'm going to buy steroids or ventilators. No. In Cuba, we have a capacity, installed capacity. It is important, but it has become very difficult to us every time we have to go and buy top priority resource to treat COVID patients. On top of that, our industry, when we have had to repair or produce, we cannot buy anything that has a minimum a percentage of U.S. technology. So what are we talking about? So we will have technological solutions that could be very innovative, but sometimes there is something missing that is essential, and perhaps a whole production line is disassembled because of that. So in short, we should write a book on the impact of blockade on the pandemic, because we have the concrete example, the concrete figures, the names, the impact, the scope of that impact. So I think it's worth conveying that information, because reinforcing the blockade, applying new measures, sanction to prosecute all our possibilities to look for an equipment, a medication, a solution. There's just one word to name it: genocide. When it comes to public health, I see a question, and they want you to refer to the problems against the 5 vaccine candidates. Has been huge. We have this revolutionary pride that we share with the Latin American brothers. Well, in just record time, we were able to come up with 5 vaccine candidates. This is a source of pride to us. It has to do with the development of these for many years. We have strong experience on these, but no doubt. But I mean, to reach a clinical trial and just to go to scale up production. So the hurdles, the blockade, to look for a certain resource, it has not forbidden us or prevented us from doing so, because we have managed to go forward. But we have to say, at time, it has delayed some of the actions that we could have done in shorter periods of times. Vaccines that, on top of that, have the huge possibility that could be also used to help other countries and other sister nations and peoples. So we believe, yes, there have been problems. The response is yes, we have been affected, there have been delays, and we have had many hurdles to surpass. Well, thank you, Dr. Liliana Morales. Marcel Duraba from MCT was asking the floor. I don't know if anyone else would like to take the floor. Marcelo, can you hear me? Marcelo, you have the floor. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you, Marcelo. Go ahead. I'm going to talk very quickly, because the crisis in Cuba is important to talk about people's strategies that are conducted here, the volunteers, the messengers, and many experiences based on the different delegates and the stakeholders in the different neighborhoods, how mothers with small children, pregnant women, sick people, or COVID patients. So we have to assess this. We have to take into account this political and economic strategy, the achievements and the achievement by the very people of Cuba in the midst of this pandemic. And this monetary ordering. So it's not only the strategy by the government, but we see how the people react. There's a mobilization from the countryside to the city based on the assistance that is rendered to assist the people. And this has had a great meaning. And they're also trying to take forward the economy. They're providing medications or food for people who cannot go out on the street to get them. So we see the achievements that you have attained, but you have to see the challenges with this monetary ordering task. The Latin American left is with Cuba when it comes to the fight against the blockade. All the measures that the U.S. government is implemented by Trump, when Cuba was included in the state on the list of states sponsoring terrorism. So we have to praise the work of the Cuban state and people. Greetings. We shall be seeing each other soon. And I would like to talk also about this importance of this period and the work of women. So because women have had a great share on this, there were disadvantages, and with the pandemic, women have had more work, and the everyday life is also very hard for women. So we would like to acknowledge the FMC, women at large. Greetings. We shall be seeing each other, and long live Cuba. Thank you, Marcelo. The MCT from the Landless Movement. Marcelo is in Cuba. He is talking about the Cuban experience and people's participation because he's been able to see that with his own eye. Thank you for your testimony, because I believe it's very important to see all these actors and the youth who are in the red areas and who are participating in all the statistics, so that the whole process flows, and of course the endurance, the endless endurance of Cuban women, of Cuban mothers that have learned to move forward and to overcome the most difficult circumstances, and no doubt we see this nowadays. Now, I would like to give the floor to Beto Almeida, journalist from Brazil. He's not in Cuba. So, Beto, you have the floor.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very touched for these explanations, and I would like to bring about some comparisons for debate at these times in which Cuba, in the face of more than 6 decades of aggression, has been able to make progress, to endure, and to promote biotechnology program, educational system. It's important to compare the fact that with a lack of resources because of the blockade in Brazil, when there is no, where we have no blockade restriction, when there is an indecent accumulation of wealth, an accumulation of capital, and there is an expansion of poverty and starvation, we are not able to achieve, for instance, a literacy campaign. We are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Pablo Freire, but Brazil has still no goals in literacy campaigns. We have learned that from Cuba, despite all its limitations. Cuba is the only country in the world that have raised their weapons to put an end to apartheid regime and helping Angola and Namibia. And we would like to, and Cuba received the gratefulness of Nelson Mandela's, and he said, we owe the end of apartheid to Cuba. And he went to Cuba, he visited Cuba to personally thank Comandante Fidel Castro. Those are great differences. We can see between our countries. There is an accumulation of resources in Brazil, and we see no progress in social achievements. There are many kids, many children which are left in the garbage containers in hospitals, in the garbage containers in communities. We can find those newly born children in this country that have some factories that manufacture planes with high technologies. So Cuba shows this example to the rest of the world, and this ferocious and criminal part of a blockade imposed by the blockade makes possible the reordering in Cuba of some resources to survive and to achieve better results in the creation of drugs, for instance, in the social behavior. Cuba is a great example for the humanity that has debt towards Cuba. That's why the attacks are more frequent from the empire. Thanks for the invitations. Congratulations to all the persons who were members of the panel. Thank you very much. Thanks, Beto. I don't know if anyone else is asking for the floor. We have Gabriela, and I would like her to say something as one of the members of the panel, perhaps getting some ideas. Manuel? Okay, Gabriela and then Manuel. First, I would like to thank once again for this opportunity. And in one of the questions was not clear for me the idea of believing that the per se ways of property are not feudal or socialist or imperialist. This is just a social reorder which is included in those societies. We have good experiences in Uruguay in the cooperative capacities or possibilities which come from some other societies but were developed in Latin America, even under capitalism. But when we give some other functioning, some other incentives, as well as some follow-up by the people, which is participating, then those forms that because of the legal approach transform themselves in social plans. We have big companies, 6 important companies are public companies. We were usually called entities, not companies. But the capitalist system changed then according to the purpose of capital. So we cannot analyze this in a very short or narrow way. I'm not saying that you have made a narrow kind of analysis, but the relations change. The way in which different companies, even not big companies, are structured. In the case of Cuba, they structure work and workers access the design of the future of workers in that country. So in the case of Cuba, the socialist ownership might exist, or in our case we have capitalist kind of companies. There is no privatization of companies in Uruguay. So this was just in my mind, and I wanted to share my way of thinking with you. The future of ours, comrades, all. My huge hug to all of you. Thank you very much. And I think 2 other people are asking for the floor. Manuel Santos, actor in Argentina, as well as Rafael. Okay, both of you. Manuel first. Hello, everyone. I would like to be brief. I just want to convey my greetings from artists from the network in Defensa de la Humanidad. I would like to thank all people participating in this forum. It's always good to listen to these kind of opinions and to have some elements to be able to have some debates domestically. I was thinking where to place our vision, our sight on. In Argentina, in the newspapers in Argentina, they used to focus on the places where Taliban were demonized. And on the other hand, they were focusing on American Marines giving bottles of milk to children in Afghanistan. Those are two images to be able to give a historic character to history. So we were able to see the images of Cuban medical brigades helping and assisting in many countries of the world, making great efforts to help in countries like Italy, for instance. And there are ethical issues and truthful things about this. Those are the news. News are changed. Some pictures were shown in the newspapers to put an end to this erotic news from the people of Cuba. This kind of encounter, these kind of conversations and dialogues are important to have the necessary information, to have debates from the cultural viewpoint, but also to disentangle all these lies which are going around by the permanent commitment with Cuba and its revolution, its presence. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate. Thanks, Manuel. And now I give the floor to Rafael Urrajola, journalist from Chile.
Aló, ¿me escucha?
Hello, yes, can you hear me? Yes, go ahead. Well, these wonderful meetings of just 25, 30 people, I think is very important. My previous speaker said that we all have a great tool, that is this cell phone. And social media work, and they work very well. When there was a social clash here in Chile in October 2019, there was a slogan that was famous. They said, no, listen to the radio, because just in the hegemonic hands, they say, talk to your neighbor. So the numbers are so shocking by the vice minister on the huge impact of the costs that the blockade has had for Cuba. If you could send that to our email addresses, in our training centers we have important social media, and I'm sure all of us, we all have many social media, and we can disseminate this. This could be an important measure that you could take, and there is any summary of what the doctors said or what the other speaker heard, they were able to put forward brilliantly. It could be very useful to us so that we can disseminate this in our country. That will be all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rafael. I think we have to finish. Perhaps one final message from each of our speakers. Doctor, you go first. Well, first, based on the request by a colleague, I would like to share with you that in the official website In the official website of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the report submitted by our Foreign Ministry to the United Nations is there. All the information is in detail. We just share with you a summary, but I'm sure you can access this information in the official website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cuba with all the numbers and calculations. Final message. I believe that it has been proven that we do not remain with our arms crossed. Although the United States is increasingly trying to reinforce measures to affect our government, our model government, I think they're imposing new challenges on us that no doubt are present in the social and economic field, because we have the socialist economic model, of course, and no doubt the improvement of the economic actors, as to count as the previous speaker said, to take a look towards 2030 and to come up with a strategy to face the world crisis as a result of the pandemic. So we have a number of tools, and with the participation of our people under the leadership of our party, our government, we have many challenges ahead of us, but no doubt we're going to be able to prevail and to achieve the vision until 2030. Thank you, Vice Minister, Dr. Eliana. Yes, likewise, I would like that those who have the chance, you can log on the website of the Ministry of Public Health. We provide an overview and many figures, not only about COVID, but also on the development of the vaccine, the anti-COVID vaccination campaign in Cuba, and many other pieces of information that could be of interest to you. So, of course, we can prepare a dossier with concrete issues, with results, with a summary of the main results derived from science, from protocol. I'm sure we could send this to you. Of course, these materials could be interesting to you. This on the one hand, and on the other hand, we cannot have a better slogan for this meeting. I loved this slogan when Abel Prieto talked to me about this. The challenge to us is part of the essence of Cubans. We Cubans, that without a challenge, we could not be Cubans. And as I said during my presentation, our goals, although they're impossible, are part of our everyday life, and this is one of the ways of being, ways of thinking. But likewise, this one of the essence is to stand in solidarity and to be friends. So without the rest of the Americas, without the rest of our colleagues who have put some time aside to be with us and who also have the will to replicate our truth. So that's the essence behind what Cuba fosters and shall continue to foster, that is to say, solidarity and sisterhood among the peoples, and to have a common dialogue with people who think and who respect what we do and who are also respected by us. So to conclude, I would like to say to my colleagues, because I apologize, because I was reading so fast in the beginning, and if there is another meeting, I would like to come as a speaker, but not as a science director, but as a member of the medical brigades abroad. I had the chance to head the medical brigade to Honduras several years ago in a historical time for that country, and I'm sure there are hundreds and thousands of health professionals and technicians who have witnessed the same. But as anecdotes and facts of everyday life, we could have an exchange. What is it that characterizes, what is the essence of that humane approach that we Cubans have, but we have learned this from the rest of Latin Americans and our region. So thank you. We shall continue with our struggle. This is our essence. Thank you very much. Thank you. Gabriela, final message. Well, we have to remain forever. I would like to thank you. I'd like to thank the Cuban people that literally taken, they save our life in other times to many hundreds of thousands of Uruguayans, even children, youth, women. I would like to thank the people who saw 100,000 health personnel in my country with the eye surgeries, and the government who did away with the commitments with the prosthesis bank. This is a shame for them. But I would like to thank you for the Yes I Can program. We could spend hours talking about everything that the Cuban people has done for us in Uruguay and for Latin America. Once again, the only thing I have to say is thank you. And here we are. My people is here. The people composed of 3.5 million. So we are going to try to send 300,000 syringes. This is my people, and my people is here, and they know where they are. As Arana said, the reason of the strength of the reason. Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you for the support and for standing in solidarity and for speaking this afternoon. I'm going to give the floor to Joel Ernesto. Likewise, I would like to thank you for the invitation, the possibility to be here, to share with so many colleagues and comrades who are taking the truth about Cuba beyond our borders, and very excited. I just wanted to say, with all the things and the campaigns against Cuba abroad, that Cuba is abandoning its essence, that we're doing something else. The biggest proof that we remain the ones who are against the U.S. And while Cuba is socialist, it is going to be there. It is the big price that we have to pay to build the model of nation that we want. And Cuba has great endeavors ahead of this to defeat this blockade, to defeat Biden, and we should not step back. And all efforts are towards that endeavor to continue growing as a nation and to think of the blockade, to minimize the effects of the blockade with the work and sacrifice of these people. As good friends said, the Cuban people deserve victory. Ernesto Moreira, you have the floor. Well, thank you for this possibility to be in this space that gives the possibility in a context in which all the information that is conveyed about Cuba, about Cuban reality, is unbalanced, is just in a single way. So to have the chance to provide certain balance when it comes to these matrices of opinion that have been created over the last few days, mostly after July 11th. So, as part of the fact that we are undergoing a difficult moment and with many challenges and difficulties, we have no way out but to surpass them and to move forward without being absolute, but we cannot overlook the international context in which Cuba is located, and the relation with the United States is a factor that has been of weight, is important, and shall continue to be of weight. No matter the nature of the state, no matter the government in Cuba, this will always be an issue that whose importance cannot be overlooked. There are many people that are interested in putting this aside. Thank you, Ernesto. Well, I would like to thank all the members of the panel, all of you who have been with us in the Gypsy chat room, and the ones that have been following us on YouTube and the different sites of Facebook, the different institutions. I would like to thank you who are listening to those of you who are listening to us in English through the English forum. So we'll meet each other on Tuesday 31st to continue debating in Cuba. At present, we shall meet again at 2 p.m. And in one of the questions, our comrade talked about people's participation, and yes, precisely, we will be addressing this topic that day, where we're going to have a dialogue on the building of unity in today's Cuba. We will have the national coordinator of the CDRs, Gerardo Hernandez Nordelo, hero of the Republic of Cuba, Glady Fundora, researcher and professor from the Latin American School of Social Sciences, Pedro de Laos, vice president of UNIAC, a member of the Government Commission to take forward the national program against racism and racial discrimination, and Joel Suarez, activist, executive committee of the Martin Luther King Memorial Center, Claudia Rafaela Alba, journalist, member of the Network Against Humanity. So we ask you to log on these platforms again. I'd like to thank you from the logistics technical standpoint who support these endeavors. As the members of the panel said, to take the truth of Cuba to all of you. Thank you very much.